Okay, it's always a pleasure and truly an honor to be invited to be part of this program. You guys have a tremendous responsibility on your shoulders. I hate to say this because we've always said that the West Texas farmer is one of the most understanding and intelligent and does things the right way, but you guys offer a tremendous amount of information to them that I think you realize too, that they either don't really understand or whatever. So you've got a responsibility, and it's a pleasure for me to be here to work with you. It's also an honor, more of a pleasure, I guess, to see a lot of you that I've had in class over the last 45 years, and to see that you're still involved in production agriculture. Because I don't know, water's running out, but we're also running out of young people that are going to agriculture. I don't know who's going to produce the food and fiber down the road to keep this world population growing like it is. And these water issues are a major concern to us, but the ability to farm is also a real issue. I think you realize we're losing a lot of arable land every year. In the United States, we're losing about 500,000 acres to city sprawl and to roads and things. I mean, in Texas, we're losing about 500,000 acres of arable land every year. So we're going to be having to produce more with less. And you guys are the ones that are going to lead the way for that. Just make sure I get I'm going to spend my time on cotton today, primarily because right around this area, cotton has been king. I'm not sure that we're going to have king in capital letters for a longer time, for much longer time, because of these price things. It's costing us way too much money to grow a crop compared to what we're getting paid for these days, so we're going to see a reduction in cotton acres. But I've spent the last, well, my entire life really with cotton. The last 45 years out here working with cotton and grain sorghum, and primarily with the physiology of the plant and water and fertility interactions in particular. So that's what I want to spend my time, and hopefully I'll get you through here by noon so we can have lunch. We all realize that we have two primary constraints to productivity in West Texas. The first being water. We're lucky to have some irrigation, which, as we all realize, is rapidly declining. The well capacities are dropping off a lot faster than the static levels are dropping, but we're rapidly depleting this aquifer. We get about 18 inches of rainfall annually, and this year kind of tell you, well, you had to almost be here that day when we got it. But the other is the adequate nutrition. Our soils, especially where we've been in cotton for many, many years, have very low organic matter, calcium. We have high pH soils, a lot of free phosphorus, and we have very low zinc in most of our soils. These are essential nutrients that we have the ability to provide, and so those things are very critical in growing cotton. We've got plenty of potassium in these soils. Most of our soil tests are running in the 400 parts per million range, whereas the critical level is about 150 parts per million. So we don't get much of a response to applied potassium. We also have a limited growing season in terms of heat unit accumulation for cotton. We can get some very cool times at planting time, which is cotton's a warm season perennial, requires temperatures above 60 degrees for adequate activity. And then in the fall of the year, when we have boll or lint and seed maturation, we have cool nights. And there again, we have problems with maturation, and one of the critical factors in terms of fiber quality is micronair. Has a pretty significant reduction in, or cost, or not cost, but price reduction if our micronair is low, and we have those problems. Only two of those we have any control over, one being irrigation water, and the second one being management of the fertility. This is a 100-year history of our rainfall and potential ET. Potential ET being the atmospheric demand, the evaporation potential of the atmosphere. And this is pretty typical of what we get. We get the majority of our rain during the summer growing season, which is really good for dryland cotton production and sorghum production. But it doesn't come close to being equivalent to how much evaporation can take place. Now, potential ET is the evaporation potential of the atmosphere. It's not necessarily the amount of water that a crop is actually using per day until we get the crop where its leaves are covering the ground. When we've got bare ground, the evaporation is simply from bare soil evaporation. One of the big problems with our summer rain is the fact that over 70% of our rainfall events are less than a ½ inch per time. And with an evaporative demand that next day of 35/100ths of an inch, 4/10ths of an inch, the vast majority of that evaporates from the soil surface. It never has a chance to go through the crop. That was one of the things with sprinkler irrigation. And when you've got a crop out there that's just getting started and 90% of the surface of the ground is bare ground, and you put on a ½ inch of irrigation water, you've lost half of it the next day. It never has a chance to be used. Only the water that goes through that crop is beneficial water. And so this ground cover where we've gone to no-till or minimum till, where we've maintained a surface cover with residue, like many of us are talking about getting back to some grain sorghum, getting some high residue crops that will reduce the bare soil evaporation. So those things are very beneficial to water management. But this is typical of what happens here with very minute rainfall in a single event. We get very little benefit out of it. So about 70% of the events are less than a ½ inch over many years of data. This is the potential evapotranspiration. It's highly variable from day to day. It changes as we move from the spring in April to the fall in September, August and September. But that just happens to be 2011, which was one of the hottest, driest years on record. And then 2014, which was a little more humidity, quite a bit more humidity in fact, but still some pretty high temperatures, especially in April or May. I just put that up there to show you what the potential evaporation rates are on a daily basis. And when we get into mid-May and through June and July, we're looking at 3/10ths to 45/100ths of an inch a day of potential ET. Now, those daily rates are highly variable, but the seasonal rates or seasonal rate of use is fairly consistent across large areas. It's not something like rainfall. I mean, a county road can be the difference between a blowing dust storm and a ½ inch of rain. With potential ET, with evaporative demand, it has a widespread area that it covers. And it's based on radiation and temperature and humidity and a little bit on wind. So this is just for 2011. If we go from the 1st of April till the end of September, we had over 50 inches of potential ET. And we had 5 inches of rain. So you can see we had 10 times more evaporation potential than we had rainfall there. It took a lot of irrigation water to make a crop. Dryland crops never even came up in 2011. The crop water use is, crop water use is dependent upon how much ground cover the leaves offer. In other words, when we start out a crop, especially if we're on 40-inch rows and plant a cotton crop, it takes it a long time to get 25% of the ground cover. It typically takes it till about peak bloom to completely close the canopy, where all of the radiation is intercepted by the crop itself. These are crop coefficients. This is the crop water use divided by the potential ET. When we start out the crop early in the season, it's using somewhere between 10 and 20% of the potential ET. And that's the crop water use. If we have a half-inch shower on that and we got a 3,500-inch rain or potential ET the next day, we've lost 70% of it. So this is what is actually going through the crop. That 3,500 results then in about 500ths or 600ths of an inch of water that actually went through that little seedling that was there. As that crop grows, when it gets to first flower, it's using about 50% of the potential ET. At first flower, it's about 50% ground cover. When it hits peak flower out there, about a 90-day-old plant, then it's got the ground covered with leaves. So it's using right at 100% of potential ET. We've got, if that's in late July, we've got 3/10 of an inch a day, that crop needs 3/10 of an inch of water. That's what's going through it. That maintains itself until we get bowl cracking, about early September. And then the leaves begin to senesce and we have less crop water use. But that's the crop coefficients. These for cotton. We have these same crop coefficients for corn, for sorghum, and so on. Corn builds a leaf area that covers the ground much, much faster than cotton does. By the time you get a 45-day-old corn plant and you're on 30-inch rows, it's using 100% of potential ET. And if you plant that where it hits that peak in late May and June, it's using 3,500ths to 4/10 of an inch of water a day. And it will continue that as long as it's got the ground covered. The stage of development of all plants determines what the critical periods in the life of that plant are to stress. Essentially, all crops that we grow, when they begin to enter the reproductive phase, the development of what's going to be the harvestable product, that's when they're very sensitive to any kind of water stress or high temperature stress. And in the case of cotton, we did quite a bit of work with the amount of water or the availability of water in these different growth stages and what percent of the yield and products of, or the components of yield were affected. The stage of development from square initiation to first flower, from the 6-leaf stage to the first flower, where you've got about 15 to 16 nodes on that plant, is by far the most critical. When you're developing plants during, or when the plant is developing during that period, the total number of fruiting sites that you're going to harvest are being produced. By the time you get to first flower, essentially every square that's going to be harvestable is already on that plant. So from square initiation to first flower, we have about 58% of the boll number per acre is determined during that period. 65% of the length per boll is determined during that period. Why does water stress during this period have a big effect on length per boll? Because it affects the number of viable seed that are in that boll. If you get that boll to no stress during that period when the square is developing, you will have 30 to 32 seed in that boll. If you have a few less or have a little more stress during that time, you'll have 25 to 28 seed in the boll. The seed produce the lint. So you have less seed, less boll weight, less lint. So that period from square initiation to first flower is very critical in determining the yield potential. The number of fruiting sites that are going to make it to harvest and the ones, or how big those fruiting sites are. from first flower to peak bloom, we still have a large effect on boll number, and boll number translates into yield per acre. The problem here is boll abortion. A little bit of stress during the first 5 days after pollination, whether it be water stress or whether it be nitrogen stress, will result in boll abortion. And so if you can manage the water so you don't have water stress and have adequate fertility, that the boll does not suffer a nitrogen stress, then that boll will stay on. So the period from square initiation to peak bloom, that's about a 60-day period. If you can manage your water supply and your nutrient supply during that period, you're going to have a bell ring. If you have a little bit of stress during that period from square initiation to first flower, you're going to limit the number of fruiting sites that the plant produces, and if it stresses them from flower to peak bloom, you're going to have greater boll abortion. We typically harvest only about 20 to 22% of the potential bolls that a cotton plant makes. And if we can get that up to 25 to 30% by proper water management, we're knocking down 4 bale an acre cotton. The cotton plant has tremendous yield potential. I mean, we've grown cotton plants that have 150 bolls per plant. And a typical cotton plant might have 15 bolls per plant. So we've got plenty of genetic potential. That's not a limiting factor. It's how the water and nutrients are made available to that plant. Dry land, you don't have many options other than pray a whole lot and hope it rains more than a quarter inch a day. But irrigated, where we've still got good water, water management and managing the fertility to meet that water use is very critical. All right, this is data that was done years ago, 25, 30 years ago now, in terms of irrigation frequency, and we typically see that a frequency of 3 to 5 days, no matter what the volume of water that you have available. I guess you all are aware that every gallon per minute per acre is equivalent to 0.053 inches per acre per day. So 2 gallons per minute, that's only 1/10 of an inch of irrigation capability a day per acre. Okay, get up to 5, which very few of us still have 5 gallons per minute per acre available, especially here in Lubbock. We're lucky to have 3 anymore. But every one of those volumes reaches its peak with frequencies on pivots, in particular, of 3 to 5 days. One day we're not putting on enough water. That's only 1/10 of an inch at 2 gallons per minute per acre. That's 1/4 of an inch at 5. It increases with the volume, but we're letting too much water get evaporated with 1 inch or 1 day frequencies. Let's see if I can hit the right button here. This is some data that I was involved in on a drip field up at Petersburg. We had a well capacity of 4 gallons per minute per acre, 2/10 inch a day. And we had part of that set up where we watered every day, 2/10 of an inch per day. And then I felt that with a drip line being 10 to 11 inches below the ground, and you putting 2/10 of an inch a day on, we just had very little potential for that water to rise and keep the soil above the drip tank wet enough to support roots. And especially if we don't get some rain during the summer to keep that root system alive in the top 5, 6 inches of soil. So we did this, and that particular year we had 12.6 inches of rain. That happened to be 2013. We put on 13.8 inches of irrigation water, Both systems got the same volume of water, just the application frequency was different. On the second one, we put 1 inch every 5 days until we hit first flower. And then we speeded it up so we didn't have that 5-day interval, and we didn't want any bowl abortion, no young bowl abortion. So we put a 1/2 inch on every 2.5 days to try to not let it run into a little bit of stress that 4th and 5th day waiting for the water. And we ended up with about almost 300 pounds of yield difference. The other thing that we see there is the micronair difference. With 1 inch application and then a 1/2 inch during that bowl filling period, we had a 3.5 mic versus a 2.8 mic. And you're well aware that micronair is weight of fiber per unit length. So the yield was affected by micronair, not as much by bowl number, bowl retention, but by micronair. And when we get into the fertility here in a minute, phosphorus is very critical to maturity of both the seed and the fiber. And if most of the phosphorus is in that top 6 inches of soil. This was compost put on every year, but it was not incorporated. So all of the phosphorus is laying in the top 4 to 5 inches. And when we don't get a rain with drip irrigation, and a drip line buried 10 to 11 inches deep, you're not going to have that top of the top 4 or 5 or 6 inches of soil wet enough to support root systems, and phosphorus don't move in the soil, so it just didn't have enough phosphorus to mature the seed and the fiber. You see the same thing with seed yield per acre. We had almost a 400 pound per acre loss in seed yield. Less weight of the seed, immature seeds, immature fiber. So managing drip systems is pretty critical. And this is a clay loam soil. In these sandy loam soils around here, you just can't get water to rise more than about 2-3 inches above the drip tank. And if you're putting out 0.2 of an inch a day, I'm not sure it even rises that far because it tends to percolate down in a teardrop shape. This is the water use efficiency. Well, let me back up a minute because I've got the water use efficiencies on here. Total water use efficiency, that 0.2 inch a day had 57.7 pounds of length per inch of total water, and the other one had 70.8, just used same volume of water, same total water available to them, just the application. So we got a 23 pound per acre increase right there just in the water use efficiency. Irrigation water use efficiency, about 85 pounds per inch of irrigation water on the everyday frequency, and 104 pounds per inch of water on the modified application system. If you can get another 20 pounds, even at 60 cents, that's about a little bit of benefit there. This is, as we go across water supply in our dryland situation, the average growing season rain is about 13 to 14 inches in the summer. We typically get 40 to 50 pounds of lint per inch of water on that. As we increase the water supply and get up into that 22 to 24 inches of total water, we're hitting 65 to 100 pounds, depending upon the application and the things we just talked about. Now, this is the other factor, input factor, that we have control over, that we can manage. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and zinc are probably the major components that we need to manage relative to the amount of water that's available. These are all involved in various functions within the plant. Nitrogen, of course, is the major requirement in terms of what we apply. We apply more nitrogen per acre than we do any of these others. Boron is important in cotton and in transport of sugars, but the Ogallala water has enough boron in it that we get boron in our irrigation water. And if you guys, some of you are from areas that grow peanuts, you know that if you're sprinkling peanuts and we don't get some rain, that you start getting boron toxicity. There's enough boron in that water to cause damage to the leaves. We don't see that in cotton. Of course, we don't irrigate, we don't do much sprinkler irrigation anymore with cotton. But boron is available. Zinc is a major problem in all of West Texas soils. These are the concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in the different parts of the plant. The leaves and the seed are the major consumers or major requirements of all of these. Nitrogen in a leaf should be somewhere in the 3 to 4% range. In a seed, 3.5 to 4.2. Those are the types of concentrations that plant is very healthy. Roots and stems and lint and burr don't have any nutrient requirements, but you got to build the plant to get the leaves and the seed in adequate condition. As we increase yield, the nitrogen use efficiency increases. It takes about 10 pounds per 100 pounds of lint for that first bale to dig. You're building the factory and you're getting about a bale per acre, 500 pounds of lint. It takes about 10 pounds of nitrogen to do that, about 1.6 pounds of phosphorus, 6 pounds of potassium. As the yield goes up, if you can manage your water to get the yield up to that 2.5 to 3 bale to the acre range, then that 100 pounds or that per 100 pounds in that range only takes 5 to 6 pounds of nitrogen. You're not building more factory, you're just getting more bowls to be retained. You're getting the nitrogen that's there to be more useful in the plant. Same with phosphorus and so on. On a cotton plant, what nutrients get into the developing bowl have to come out of the leaf that subtends that bowl. All of you know that a cotton, the reproductive branches are stepwise, and you have a square, and the bottom of that square is a leaf. That provides the carbon as well as all the nutrients that go into that bowl. There's no direct contact between the roots taking up water and nutrients and getting it into the square or into the bowl. It has to go into the leaf, and then when the fruit is beginning to develop, it is moved out of the leaf. The leaf still accumulates till it's totally mature, but the nutrients really have to come out of the leaf. So if you go into fruiting period with deficiencies in that plant, especially in terms of nitrogen, then you're going to end up with bowl abortion. Because that little embryo needs quite a bit of nitrogen. And it has to come out of the leaf as amino acids. It's not in terms of a nitrate or an ammonical ion. It's an organic molecule that comes out of the leaf and goes into the developing bowl. Otherwise, it aborts. 5 minutes? Okay, I'm about to. These are the developmental phases in terms of a bowl. The first 20 days, the bowl goes from a tiny little product to full volume. The fiber length is determined during that first 20 days. Fibers are extensions of cells on the seed coat of the seed. And so water and potassium are very critical in developing cell expansion and developing volumes of bolls and seed and fiber. Nitrogen and phosphorus uptake occur from shortly after fertilization until about 30 days later. So we've got a period there where the nitrogen and phosphorus is taken up. Bowl dry weight begins to develop shortly after fertilization. It doesn't reach its maximum until that bowl is about 45 days old. And then cellulose and oil which are the components of the fiber and of the seed, begin to develop about 20 days after fertilization, and by the time the bulb is open, the seed has all the oil in it it's going to have, and the fiber has matured. The cellulose is a measure of micronaires, measure of the cellulose per unit weight. Our soils have a couple of major problems. We have high pH. All of our soils in West Texas have a pH of at least 7.2, 7.3. A lot of them are reaching pHs of 8. We have relatively low organic matter rather than up on the North Plains where they've had a good rotation with corn, some high residue crops. These soils here in Lubbock County, 0.5% organic matter is pretty high. We're going to see a whole lot more high residue sorghum in particular being grown in the next few years. Nitrate nitrogen ranges from 10 parts per million to 40. One of the things I want to caution you about after last year is we had enough rainfall during the growing season and again in September that we had considerable nitrate leaching. You need to determine how far that nitrogen went. We looked at some soil in Hale County or Floyd County last year following those rains, and we lost about 80 pounds of applied nitrogen that went out pre-plant, went below 3 feet deep in those soils. And that's a clay loam. And these sandy loams and loamy sands, the further south we get, nitrate nitrogen moves with the water. And when we got those rains in September with 6 to 8 inches there in 2 or 3 days, your nitrate went right on down out of the profile. With the soil moisture probes that we're using today, very little water is taken below 3 feet, whether it be a cotton crop or a sorghum crop or a corn crop. So if you've got a sandy loam or a loamy sand and you don't hit caliche till you're 3 or 4 feet deep, you've lost a heck of a bunch of nitrogen. The other problem we had with water was, and this was last year, is if you fill that profile pre-plant and you got all that May and June rain, you had a free ride with water going right on out of the bottom of the profile too. In my opinion, and I think a whole lot of us, filling the profile prior to planting is a pretty significant waste of water. If you look at the development of that crop and look at the crop coefficients, we don't really get, we've got 40 days or so from the time we plant until that crop is using. You got plenty of time there to fill that profile if it don't rain. But again, the major rainfall is May through July. And so if you got the profile full and you get the rains we got this year, the end of May and in June, that was wasted water. That's the free water that was available to you, and you let it waste. Now, if you got 2 gallons per minute per acre and you got a 125 acre circle and it don't rain, you're going to have a hard time ever getting it full. So, you got to know what your water supply is. One of the big problems that we have in nearly all of Texas soils is zinc. It don't matter whether you're on the South Plains or whether you're in Central Texas in the Blacklands or you're in South Texas. Zinc in Texas is relatively low. It's somewhere between 0.2 of a part per million up to 1 or somewhere in that range. But cotton really depends upon good zinc. Zinc is one of those things that stimulates new fruiting sites. And if you've got a zinc deficiency, if you're less than 0.5 part per million, plants will respond. I'm about to run out of my 5 minutes. Okay. I want to just spend a little bit of time here, a minute or two. Nitrogen source, nitrates are ions, anions, In order to get that nitrate into the plant, it takes energy. In order to reduce that nitrate to ammoniacal nitrogen to build amino acid, it takes energy. If we go with a 100% ammoniacal nitrogen and different volumes of water, we have relatively low yields. If we go all nitrate, they're even lower than they are all ammoniacal nitrogen. A 75-25 ammoniacal nitrogen to nitrate is the ideal. 75-35 happens to be 32-00. You got 75% ammoniacal nitrogen, 25% nitrate. Applications of phosphorus. We find that putting all the phosphorus out pre-plant with as much calcium as we got in the soil and the high pHs, the phosphorus that's out there has been bound to the calcium, is unavailable, it's insoluble. If we apply more phosphorus or apply the majority of the phosphorus in season, we get significant increases in yield compared to putting the same amount out pre-plant. Also, you'll notice that doing that, once we get above 20 pounds per acre in cotton, there's really not a significant yield increase. And phosphorus is pretty high dollar these days. So 20 pounds, I've seen over many years, 20 pounds per acre of phosphorus is all that the cotton plant needs. Anything above that is a waste of money. Nitrogen-phosphorus ratios. I run a nitrogen-phosphorus blend through my pivots. I run a 5-1 blend, and I have about 4 gallons per minute per acre. And I get a good benefit out of the 5-to-1. That's a 25-5 blend, 25 nitrogen, 5 phosphorus, and I run some sulfur with that. What that's doing is lowering the pH of the water that comes out of the pivot. Instead of the 7.3 or 7.4 pH of the water, it's down to about 6.6. And that's dissolving zinc and iron and even phosphorus that's in the soil. It's making those more available. This is bold size. Here comes the importance of phosphorus again on micronair. As we go from just nitrogen all the way to a 5-to-3 ratio, you can see that our length per bowl goes up. Again, 5-to-3 is a pretty high amount of phosphorus. This is micronair, and again, you can see that we're with 4 gallons per minute per acre, we're bumping 3.9 for micronair, whereas with no phosphorus applied, we actually hit the baseline there at 3.5. But again, micronair is weight per unit length, so if we can go from a 3.5 to a 3.9, we've just increased the yield by about 10%. Zinc, as I mentioned, and we did this study back 3 years, for 3 years in brownfield in a loamy fine sand, and at New Deal in a clay loam. And we started out in the sand at 0.28 parts per million of zinc. The clay had 0.65. The control made 1120. Where we put it in with the soil, we made about 70 pounds more. When we applied the same amount as a foliar, we jumped that up to about 130 pounds per acre, increased it by 130. On the clay loam, it was about the same amount of increase. So I'm a believer in foliar zinc. Put out a little bit about the time you start squaring. You can run Northene or Bidrin or some flea hopper insecticide with it. And then again, a second application about first flower to put some growth regulator picks or something with it. And you get a kick out of both the zinc and the additive to it. I think that's about all I've got. We got plenty of potential in the cotton plant. There's people making 7-8 bales to the acre. A friend of mine in Arizona made 7.5. We got a guy down here at Big Spring that made 6 or something like that, almost 7. We're making 2 bales a acre yield when we used to think 2 bales an acre was a bumper crop. So there's plenty of potential there. We've got to manage those 2 things that we can manage, water and fertility, and make sure we don't allow any stress during those critical periods. Thank you. It's a pleasure to always be here.
Thank you.